Increasingly, our world, we're coming to grips with the fact that ICT, has an increasingly important role to play in how we manage, how we work. And this morning in our presentations, what we saw coming through was a common thread of change. And some of the practitioners and some theorists believe that ICT is one of the most compelling forces of change, and as well as one of the more powerful tools of globalization. Many of our speakers this morning alluded to the fact that technologies are eroding the barriers to communication and information flows that are facilitating our empowerment as individuals to make choices. And this has enormous implications on how business is done by organizations if they are to preserve their relevance, survive, and be competitive in a globalized environment. Mr. Anthony Watkins is an accomplished organization development consultant who has, in his many roles, been tasked with leading change. He has served as a member of the Board of Management of the Caribbean Industrial Research Institute, the Board of Directors of the National Petroleum Marketing Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited, the Trinidad and Tobago Public Service Commission, and the Commission's Board of the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. I believe that with these credentials, Mr. Watkins is therefore well placed to motivate us to confront the challenges that face us in the world in which we live. The need for change is constant, and the role of leadership is even more pivotal. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Watkins to speak up to us on leading change in a complex environment. Mr. Watkins.
Thank you very much for your introduction. I have your permission to stand, right?
Yes, you do.
Usually people ask for permission to sit. I want to ask for permission to stand, just so that I can keep track of the people in the back there who are falling asleep. That will be my barometer of, how soon I should wrap up. Let me just check and make sure that it works. There we go. Wonderful. I was challenged, in preparing this presentation. And it's about leading change, and it's about ICT, and it's about leadership and all that kind of stuff. And I just had the impression that coming to CARICOM, I'm not sure if the presentation ended up being a bouillon, a pepper pot, a pilau, a sancoch, a oil dog. I'm not sure what it was, but I just have a sense that a lot of things are in the pot, and it's just Caribbean. That's all it is. All right, so I'll share it with you and talk a little bit about those two things, both leadership and change, and how we combine those two in what is really a challenging environment. Now, some of the emerging considerations, and one of them, of course, is that the world is experiencing multiple convulsions. All kinds of things are happening around us. We have rapidly morphing ICT phenomenon, constant and pervasive change, shifting demographic in terms of age and orientation. Not only is the composition of our population changing, but what is important for them is very different from, what's important to us younger ones is very different from what's important to you all, So the orientation, they're coming from a different place, and they're looking to a different future. We're also dealing with a region that's playing catch-up and coming to terms with shaping its future. We're playing catch-up in cricket. Well, let's not go there. We're playing catch-up in a whole lot of things, okay? In terms of economic integration, it really is, we know where the world is going, and we are busy trying to catch up. But importantly, it is also a search, we're involved in a search for progress in a context of paradox. And I want to just refer to a document that came across, many of you all may have seen it, many years ago, called The Paradox of Our Times. And essentially it says that we have wider highways but narrower viewpoints. We build bigger houses, but we have more broken homes. We eat more food, but we get less nutrition. We spend more, but we get less in terms of value. We could go to the moon and come back, but we find it difficult to cross the street and greet a neighbor. So we're really going after this thing that we call progress, but we're wondering at what price? What is it that we're going for? And we're grappling with that paradox of progress. So, I mean, that's the world in which we live, and that's the world that is inviting us to come to meet it. What are the facts of the case? Well, change or die. It is not about survival of the fittest, but survival of the most adaptable. You don't have to be big and strong to survive. You just have to be nimble and adaptable to what is happening around us. But let's get some conceptual clarity here. We talk about change and we talk about transformation, we talk about transition as though they're the same thing. And I want to just put on the table that change essentially has to do with the external things that we put in place. So we bring in a new policy, we change the structure, we bring some new furniture, we move to a new building, we bring in some new ICT equipment. Those are changes. Now when you introduce a change, there's an intent. And the intent is some kind of transformation. You really want to move to some kind of great future, some difference, and you want the world to be a different way and to be in a different place. But somewhere between the change that you introduce and the transformation that is effected, there's the challenge of transition. How do we get people, how do we get organizations to go through the emotional, attitudinal, behavioral, operational, and procedural shifts that really take us from where we have been, the change that is introduced, and take us to this ultimate promised land, this desired future. So that when we talk about change and leading through change, yes, we have to lead change. We have to lead towards transformation, but very importantly, we have to lead through transition. So what kind of leadership is needed? We have to promote transformation. We have to implement changes. And we have to facilitate transition. That really is what it takes. As people working in an organization like this, and this is what CARICOM is about, it's about promoting transformation across the region for the people. That requires that we implement some changes, but a lot of what ought to be happening in terms of transformation may not be happening because we may not be doing our best job at facilitating that transition. Easy to talk about leadership, but let me put on the table the big question. What is this leadership thing that we refer to? Well, let's talk about that. In Odyssey, as in terms of our framework, we look at some of the background issues that challenge us when it comes to leadership. What is our historical and cultural legacy? Leadership. Who are our leaders? Who were our leaders over the past few hundred years? What was the style and ethos that characterized that? And it may very well have been force, power, status, and rank, and I say, and you do. That very well may be the legacy that we've carried with us. And it's not a slavery thing. Just think about your school days. A teacher said, and you did. Think about some of our homes. Parents said, and we did. You know, so that this legacy is very much part of us. But that is that authoritarian approach, we may want to ask ourselves if it really is ours, if it's a universal thing. And I want to just flag an alternative. Because we live and function to a large extent in a Euro-Western American sphere. And leadership is really about John Wayne and somebody riding into town and taking over the town, and the sergeant in the army saying, come on, let's go and take the hill, and we go and we do that. But in another part of the world, if we went to the Orient, leadership is not so much about force and I say, but there's a quality to a lot of the leadership in the Orient that is about being the sage, the wise person. So you have the problem,
and you climb the hill and you're going to see the wise one, and you finally get up there and you say, oh wise one, I have a problem. My problem is X, Y, and Z. What do you think I should do? The wise one gazes at his or her navel for about 5 minutes and then says to you, well, you've climbed the hill. I mean, that's not an answer. You went up there for answer, so you're going back down the hill upset, and something happens on the way back down the hill. Insight. Something comes to you. And it's really about the understanding that leadership is not always the take charge, I must make it happen kind of thing, but there are different ways to lead and ultimately to influence. Some other considerations in looking at leadership. When we talk leadership, are we talking leadership or are we talking about the leader? Because we confuse the two. So is it about the position or is it about the person? Is this thing about status and the rank, or is it about the person's behavior? Is it about the person's character, what they stand for, what they represent, their qualities? Or is it about the skills and the techniques they use to get us to do what they want us to do? What really is this leadership thing? And then of course the other dimension to leadership is the issue of power. And we have come face to face with power historically. But is it about position power, or is this about personal power? You know, the people who are the Spanish speakers among us will understand the difference between la fuerza and el poder. La fuerza is the force, the strength. So if I have that kind of power, that's Rambo power. You have to come into a room, break down the door. But el poder, and for those of you, poder means what? Well, what does it mean initially, originally? Poder is an infinitive that means to be able. And el poder means the power, but not power over, but power in terms of being able to. The confidence, the assurance, the courage to lean into difficult things, saying, this thing may be tough, but you know what? I feel I can. And that's a different kind of power. So that maybe in some ways maybe needing to move away from la fuerza, because there's no way we could control all those forces that are around us. And ask ourselves, how do we develop the poder, the courage, that confidence that takes us into what are some of the difficult and the challenging times? But how do we define leadership in our practice? We would say that leadership is the process of influencing self, others, and organizations through growth and change towards achieving results and fulfilling a vision or purpose. That is a mouthful. Leadership is the process of influencing self, others, and organizations through growth and change towards achieving results and fulfilling a vision or purpose. What strikes you about that definition? What looks a little strange or odd here? Self. Because when we think about leadership, we lead other people. But listen, nature has some fabulous lessons for us. Nature says to me that if I'm to jump to touch the ceiling, there's a way I begin. I don't just jump, I do this. I actually move in the opposite direction from the direction I intend to go to. The further forward I want to throw something, the further back I'll carry my hand. Even if I want to dig a hole downwards, I begin the downward digging by lifting the implement up. If we are really to lead out, we begin that process by leading in. And so we could think of it, and let's look at some details on this definition that look at really the issue of the process. And process implies what? Continuity. It implies inputs and outputs. And it really says to us, no matter how good it is, it can be better. So no matter how well you think you're leading, you can improve it. It's a process and it is there to be improved. But it also means, what am I putting into this process of influencing? What am I reading? What's the information that I'm putting in? What am I listening to? What am I putting on the table as I engage with people around me? So there's the notion there of leadership not as person, not as group of people who are in a certain place within the country, but leadership as process. And what that implies is that I do not have